let's start. My name is David. I'm one of the developers of CodeExpert. We develop CodeExpert at the ETH Zurich with a team of 5 developers in the meantime, and we are using heavily Meteor to actually develop our online IDE for learning. This talk consists of 2 parts. In the first part, I will just explain what CodeExpert is and what we want to achieve with CodeExpert. In the second part, we will show some challenges we have developing CodeExpert and some solutions we came up with where we use some tooling of Meteor to actually overcome these issues. If you have any questions, please feel free to write in the chat, and I will try to answer them as soon as I realize that there are some chat messages. So, what is CodeExpert? Very important, CodeExpert is not to design to be the best IDE there. It's not designed to be the best general IDE you can use for programming. What we want to achieve is that CodeExpert is the best IDE suited for teaching and learning computer science. So the goal is here to reduce the steps for students to actually learn computer science and be able to start in the first hour of computer science education, start coding right away. So CodeExpert is more than an online IDE. It's actually an online platform for organizing and conducting programming courses. It consists of several parts which are linked together and helps students to actually go through the semester and go through their course teaching computer science and learning computer science. It consists actually of an exercise delivery dashboard where we help students to know where they stand in their curriculum and where they should focus next. It's also an online IDE to reduce the step for novice users to actually start programming. So we want that users can start programming 10 minutes after they start their exercises. So they don't need to install any tools on their computer. They can just open the browsers, open CodeExpert, and then they can start programming. It also contains a submission systems for exercises. So all the students submit their code into our system, and this is then used for several purposes. One is, for example, gamification to increase the motivation of the students. They can actually gain experience points by coding and then can use them to unlock certain advanced materials provided by the lecturers. For learning computer science, it's very important to get a feedback. And there we have several ways to provide feedback. One is automatic feedback, which is based on specific test cases provided by the lecturer. But this is normally not enough to really learn computer science. And CodeExpert is really designed to help provide high quality feedback by real humans, in our case, teaching assistants, to all the students using CodeExpert. These feedbacks can be either written or orally. So even in courses with up to 600 students, we can provide orally feedback every 2 weeks by real humans in a one-to-one settings by using CodeExpert to organize this. CodeExpert is also used in high-stake exams where students actually depend on how their study is going further depends on how they perform using CodeExpert during an exam. So it's a high stress situation, time limit, and it really can decide if you can continue your studies at ETH or not. So here are some small screens from CodeExpert. Here's our exercise delivery dashboard. Here you see in green everything which is already done. In orange, what the student should focus next. And below you see, for example, some bonus exercise which they need to still unlock. So they need to solve some more tasks until they can unlock these bonus exercise. The goal here is that the students is never lost during the semester, that they always know where they should focus next and how they should continue to learn computer science. Then we have an IDE, which is just a normal IDE. As you know it, you have some programming tools, you have some file tree, you have some terminal below, but on the right side, you have some introduction, which is suited for the case the students need to solve in this current exercise. So CodeExpert is actually used for introductory programming classes. We have around 2,500 students per semester, which use CodeExpert for introductory programming classes. There you need to think about students which are not really familiar with coding. They're most likely not really familiar with how to install specific tools on their computer. So there the goal is to actually reduce the steps students are required to start programming. Then we also use it for advanced programming classes like master courses, where the focus is more to provide all students with a similar environment and make it ensure that certain restrictions hold for every student. There we have around 1,500 students. In spring term 2020, we have a total of 29 courses at the ETH. We are now starting to accepting courses from other universities out of Switzerland in CodeExpert, beginning with this fall term. In the last semester, we had around 1,300 programming tasks, which leads to around 600,000 code submissions, which were reviewed by TAs and given feedback based on that. And in a total, the students executed 62 days of runtime on our system. So why do we actually use Meteor for CodeExpert? One of the reasons is it started as a prototype. We started, I think, in May, and we want to start with CodeExpert in September. And so, in our opinion, Meteor is quite suited for these use cases because it really allows fast prototyping and fast development phase. Another important aspect, an IDE needs reactivity, not only based on user actions, but also on actions on external systems. For example, on the code execution, or if a TA is providing you feedback, it needs to be reactive. And another important step is you don't need to think about tooling in CodeExpert with Meteor. So what were our challenges developing CodeExpert? One is scalability. We have currently up to 600 parallel active users during exercise seasons, and in exams we have around 800 parallel active users. If you know an IDE, you know the load is quite heavy for these users. And also these users are very stressed, and therefore it's also very time critical. If they want to execute their programming code, they don't want to wait 1 or 2 minutes until they see the results. They want to see the results several milliseconds after they submit it. They want to have the same experience as in a normal IDE. Another challenge for us is the maintainability. We have quite a large code base, and also testability is quite an issue for us because it's a very complex system. Another challenge are the high stakes exam. There we have some regulatory conditions, for example, that everything must run on our own infrastructure without any external dependencies. So we can't go to Google Cloud, Amazon Cloud, but we need to run it on our infrastructure, which also means we don't have the same infrastructure as you're familiar with cloud providers, where you can just request additional resources and get them. We can also request additional resources, but normally this requires that we write an email and then 1 day later we get the resources. Another thing is, in high stakes exam, it must be very robust and scalable. We can't have any performance issues during an exam. And also after the exam, we should be able to look at all the things the students did to actually be safe if the students complain that something went wrong. So how do we solve these different challenges? I picked for all of the challenges for scalability, picked up our publication triggers, which is based on the publications of Meteor. So after some time in the beginning, you just use your publications and get all the data to the client. After some time, you really see you get scalability problems. And then we decided to use these publications not for fetching data, but instead for fetching some small amounts of data, normally just a date field and some collection with a single field, and use them as trigger for data fetching operations. With this, you are much less likely to leak any confidential data to the client. It's much easier to secure because you have only one field you need to think about. And it's quite unusual that several publications overlap. with these use cases, and therefore it makes it much easier to develop these. And we saw when we deployed it that there was a reduction of several orders of magnitude in the memory consumption of our servers. There are still some drawbacks with these publication triggers, which is it requires an additional round trip to load the data. But in our case, we're quite happy with it. So we don't need to think about oplog scaling with Redis, but we actually could reduce and improve the performance of our publication and subscriptions. So for maintainability, we decided for 2 years to completely go full TypeScript in our application. We started with JavaScript as fast prototyping, and then we decided to migrate our whole code base to TypeScript. And at this time point, there was not really a solution available for full TypeScript support for methods and also for publication. So we developed our own. And there we have several preconditions. One was that the TypeScript support for methods should not change or alter any Meteor API or behavior. We don't want to go into the internals. It should be put on top of it. It should work with a limited amount of boilerplate code. So we don't want to have lots of boilerplate code in all our methods, but reduce it to as few lines of code as needed. And it should not require additional tooling like compile steps or transform steps or anything else. We achieved also the same for publications, but there we are currently not really satisfied because it still needs to require a lot of boilerplate code, and it's not really useful for the general audience. So I focus now on the methods. So the idea we used is that we use declaration merging of TypeScript. So we have just an interface called methods where we register all our methods. We have our methods. Here in this example, I use the validated methods because I think most of you will be familiar with it. And you just write your method as you normally would, except that you add some type annotations as you are required for TypeScript. And then the magic is that you actually need to register this method in the interface. So you extend the interface with your method name and the type of your method. And that's all you are required to do if you write a new method on the server side. To glue these things together, you need some boilerplate code. I go here into details. I will show also later a link where you can read it up in more time. So the idea is that we somehow need to get all our method names, which is very simple because it's saved in our interface methods, and we just need the key of operator. Then we also need to extract our parameters, which is a generic functions over a method name. And if the method name exists, then it returns the validated method arguments of our interface method with the name n. And otherwise, it should result in a TypeScript error. And the same for the result. So we now have our types for the name, for the parameters, and for the result. Then we need to glue them up together. It's called method fn or whatever you want to call it, which is also a generic function. We have a helper function, which is the nullable function, which actually helps to solve the problem that you might have methods with no properties or parameters and have method with parameters. And this is solved by this nullable function. And this gets some parameters via the method name m and returns a promisified result. And then we have our client code from which we call our method, which is actually just, many people are using just a promise around Meteor call and promisify it so you get a promise back on your client. And with this tooling, you can actually start calling your method from the client with full type support for the method name, which is really important if you have more or several hundred methods. It's also important to have type support for the method name, for all your parameters, and also for the return type. And then you can use these helper functions, for example, in React, and write your React hook use method, which actually internally use this call method. So there's still some shortcomings, but they can be overcome. One shortcoming is for validated methods, you have actually no connection between the runtime validation, which is based in my example on simple schema, and the type at compile time. Our actual implementation of type-safe Meteor is still using the old one, but we have also a new one where we use internally IOTS to actually connect the runtime validation to the type system. There are also other libraries like sort, which is currently proposed by some Zodan at Meteor to be used. We actually use IOTS because we use heavily FPTS in our application. So the benefits for us, it's you have an autocomplete for method names. You have a full type support for parameters and return type, which really helps to ensure that the application is much safer than before. Another big benefit we saw is that during the migration, it allows a gradual adaptation. You can just switch one method at a time and don't need to rewrite all your several hundred methods you have in your application. And this really helps to gradually adapt TypeScript, which is very important because you can't switch a large code base to TypeScript in one step. If you want to read up more details about this, there's some blog article. I put the link into it, where you can read it up, because I think I was too fast. But Meteor is not without any problems. So we are still struggling with several parts of Meteor where we try certain things out, but it doesn't work. And sometimes you get really frustrated, want to replace Meteor, but this also provides other challenges. But currently we are fighting with several issues. One is there's no tree shaking support in Meteor out of the box. We are using now several Fastcade implementation files where we only import from certain libraries, certain long paths to actually ensure that not the whole library is supported. If tree shaking would be enabled, it would be a great benefit for us. Another thing is there's no support for TypeScript project references. We have currently a code base which needs around 30 to 60 seconds compile time in TypeScript, depending on your computer, if you start from without cache. And this really gets a burden. And with TypeScript project references, you would be actually able to split the application in different TypeScript projects, which can be compiled independently and should reduce the overall performance during development. And this is also one of the major issues we have, that the performance during development is not ideal. So we have, I think, an initial start uptime of around 1 to 2 minutes. And also reloads takes around several to 10 seconds. Another problem we're always struggling, even if you have these publication triggers, are these publication subscribe model. It's very easy to use, and it's also very easy to actually misuse it or not really be able to secure it to the things you want to share. It's also very hard if you don't want to export your Meteor, your Mongo collections as you have them in the database. But if you want to make some transformations on these collections, it's really hard to use publication subscribe. You need to implement your own custom publication and subscribe, which is really fragile and hard to maintain. And what we always see, it's very hard to avoid leaking additional information to the client, because there might be other publications on the client available using from a different part of the system, which misconfigure then some of your subscribe and publication. And it's really hard to get these publication subscribe done. In the beginning, I said it's very nice because you can really start up fast with it. But if you have a large application and need to secure your fast prototyping from publication subscribe, it's getting quite a challenge. So that was from me. I think I'm still in time. So thanks a lot for your time. And if you have any questions, please free to contact me. And thanks for the opportunity to give the talk. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. If you have any questions, just write in the chat or raise your hand.
So I'll use this opportunity and privilege that I have as a host of the conference to ask my question. So does ETH have any courses on Meteor?
No, because there are not really any courses on web development.
Okay.
So they're like foundations of algorithms and courses like that, or very specific courses, or like compiler design courses which run on our system. So we are not computer science at the ETH normally focus really on the core principles of computer science and not really on, how do you say, usage of these technologies.
Yeah, and kind of more of a say theoretical question with that. Would it be possible, like maybe to use code experts to design a course that for Meteor, or would that require a lot of additional work to get that going?
It would be possible. The problem is always we need to, currently it's only on premises, so we can't give it externally. So we have currently working with some universities out of Switzerland. We have now the allowance since this semester to that they can actually execute courses on CodeExpert. Theoretically, it should be possible, but it's always, it's not in our decision how much open source we are going. It's always a political issue. And depends not only on us, these decision making, it also takes quite a lot of time. So, but theoretically, it would be possible. Practically, it's a different kind of story.
Yes. So we have a couple of more questions. So I'll start with Ivonik. Do you have any example of the publication trigger implementation? It seems like a great idea to reduce potential performance issue with publications by keeping the reactivity.
I can just write an article and show some small example. It's very simple actually, but I will give some details. I think I will make an article and put the link in the chat today afternoon.
Yeah, or if you can send it to me, then I'm going to publicize it to everybody through our Twitters and on the forums as well.
So it's not really some really technical thing. It's just reducing your publications to actually a small amount of data. But I show some details.
Yes. And I am going to, from Jan Kuster, the final question: how do you host cluster, Kubernetes, etc.? Classics VM for each cluster, external Mongo or one Mongo per instance. So let's leave it at that.
So we have classical VMs. So for the exam systems, I think we have around 26 servers running. So the code execution is actually happening on different systems. For the front end, we use around 4 servers with each 8 instances of CodeExpert. We have an Nginx proxy before to increase the performance of our web application, and the code execution of the students actually happening on different systems. We have an internal MongoDB, which is running currently on 3 servers, and we hope we can stay with this setup and don't need sharding in the near future. But currently we are it's looking good because we can start deleting all data. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you very much for the talk and for all the information I've provided. Just a reminder to everybody, don't forget to send your feedback to David through the under survey links under talks. So there's a take survey. So if you click on that, you will get to the Roti survey. So, let us know what you thought about the presentation, about David and everything. And with that, thank you very much. And we are off to the next session.
Okay, thanks a lot, and bye. Enjoy the rest of the conference.